My name is Harvey Richardson, and I'm 57 years old. Last Tuesday, I sat across from my son Jake in one of downtown's finest restaurants. The candlelight flickered gently between us, casting warm shadows on white tablecloth. I could hear the soft murmur of conversations from nearby tables, the gentle clink of silverware against porcelain. The aroma of grilled salmon and fresh herbs filled the air. I genuinely believed this lunch would mark a turning point in our relationship after months of painful silence. I watched Jake studying the menu, his brow furrowed in concentration, and felt a surge of hope wash over me. Perhaps today we could finally bridge the gap that had grown between us. I had no idea that within the next hour he would speak words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about fatherhood and family loyalty. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you find this story meaningful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. Now let me take you back to how this all began, because what happened next changed everything I believed about family. 3 years ago, my world imploded when my marriage to Martha ended in a bitter divorce that split our family right down the middle. I had spent 25 years building Richardson and Associates, my architectural firm, from nothing more than a drafting table in my garage into a multi-million-dollar company. Success had always come naturally to me in business, but somehow I had failed miserably at keeping my family together. Jake, now 28, used to be my pride and joy. I remember teaching him to ride a bicycle in our driveway on summer afternoons, his laughter echoing through the neighborhood as he finally found his balance. We spent countless weekends at the lake, fishing in comfortable silence, while the morning mist rose from the water. I taught him how to tie proper knots, how to read the weather, and how to be patient with nature's rhythm. When he graduated from college with a degree in business administration, I felt such overwhelming pride that I could barely contain myself during his commencement ceremony. But after the divorce, everything changed with surgical precision. Martha had always been manipulative, but I never imagined she would weaponize our son against me. She began feeding Jake carefully crafted stories about how I had neglected the family for my career, how I had put money before love, how I had never truly been present for the important moments. These weren't outright lies, but twisted versions of reality that painted me as a selfish monster who cared more about blueprints than birthdays. Jake started declining my invitations to dinner. His text responses became shorter and less frequent. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. When I tried to visit him at his apartment, he would either not answer the door or claim he was too busy to talk. I felt like I was losing my only child, one conversation at a time, watching helplessly as Martha's poison slowly turned my son into a stranger. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect with him. I sent handwritten letters explaining my side of the story, but they were apparently never opened. I emailed articles about architecture that I thought might interest him, remembering how he used to love visiting construction sites with me as a boy. I even showed up at his workplace once hoping to catch him off guard, but he was so cold and distant that I felt like an unwelcome intruder in his life. For months, I carried this crushing weight of rejection. Sleep became elusive as I replayed conversations in my head, searching for clues about where I had gone wrong. I found myself driving past places we used to visit together, hoping to feel some connection to happier times. The silence from Jake was deafening, and Martha's satisfaction at having successfully turned him against me was evident in every smugly worded text message she sent regarding practical matters. Finally, after nearly a year of this painful standoff, Jake agreed to meet me for lunch. When he called to suggest the restaurant, I felt such relief that I actually teared up in my office. I thought maybe time had given him perspective. Maybe he was ready to hear my truth. Maybe we could start rebuilding the relationship I treasured more than any professional accomplishment I had ever achieved. The restaurant buzzed with the energy of successful professionals, conducting business over expensive wine and artfully plated entrees. I had arrived 15 minutes early, wanting everything to be perfect for this crucial conversation. I chose a corner table, away from the main traffic flow, somewhere we could speak privately without being overheard or interrupted. The server, a young woman with genuine warmth in her eyes, recommended the seafood special and promised to give us plenty of time to catch up. When Jake walked in, I was struck by how much he had matured since I had last seen him properly. His shoulders had broadened, his jawline had sharpened, and he carried himself with a confidence that reminded me painfully of myself at his age. He wore a charcoal grey suit that fit him perfectly, and his hair was styled in a way that made him look every inch the successful young professional I had always hoped he would become. Our initial conversation was stilted but polite. He ordered the grilled chicken breast while I chose the salmon, both of us making small talk about the weather and current events, as if we were acquaintances rather than father and son. I asked about his work at the marketing firm, where he had been employed for the past 2 years. He told me about recent campaigns he had worked on, speaking with enthusiasm about projects that involved social media strategy and brand development. I shared updates about my own business, describing a new sustainable housing development I was designing for the city's east side. I explained how modern architecture could incorporate environmental consciousness without sacrificing aesthetic appeal, hoping to rekindle the interest he had once shown in my work. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes when I mentioned using recycled materials in innovative ways. As our main courses arrived, I felt brave enough to venture into more personal territory. I told him how much I had missed him, how empty the house felt without his presence, how I regretted any mistakes I had made as a father. I acknowledged that my focus on building the business might have sometimes taken precedence over family time, but I explained that everything I had worked for was intended to secure his future and give him opportunities I never had. Jake listened without interrupting his expression, carefully, neutral as he cut precise pieces of chicken and chewed thoughtfully. I interpreted his silence as consideration rather than rejection, which gave me courage to continue. I began talking about legacy, about the possibility of him joining Richardson and Associates someday if he ever decided that marketing wasn't his true calling. I mentioned that the company bore our family name for a reason that I had always envisioned it as something we could build together. I even brought up my will explaining how everything I had worked for would eventually be his. The company, the family house where he had grown up, my investment portfolio, even my collection of vintage architectural books that had inspired my career. All of it was being held in trust for his future. I wanted him to understand that despite our recent distance, he remained the most important person in my life and the sole heir to everything I had accomplished. That was when Jake's demeanor shifted completely. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and he set it down with deliberate care. He looked directly at me for the first time during our meal, his eyes hard and distant in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. What he said next would replay in my mind for months afterward, each word etched into my memory with crystalline clarity. "You're not part of my life, Dad. You never really were." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs and leaving me speechless in the middle of that elegant restaurant. I watched in stunned silence as Jake calmly placed his napkin on the table, pushed back his chair, and stood up without another word. He walked out of the restaurant with steady, purposeful steps, leaving me alone with 2 half-eaten meals and a crushing sense of finality that felt like a death sentence. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at the empty chair where my son had been sitting. The server approached cautiously, asking if everything was all right with our meals, if perhaps my companion would be returning soon. I managed to mumble something about him having an emergency to attend to, paid the check with hands that trembled slightly, and walked to my car in a daze that made the familiar streets seem foreign and threatening. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and stop signs that I navigated on autopilot, while my mind reeled from what had just transpired. Jake's words echoed in my head with the relentless rhythm of a funeral dirge. "You're not part of my life. You never really were." The finality in his voice, the cold certainty with which he had delivered that devastating verdict, left no room for hope or reconciliation. When I reached my house, the same house where Jake had taken his first steps and celebrated countless birthdays, it felt like a mausoleum filled with ghosts of happier times. I walked through rooms that suddenly seemed too large and too quiet, past photographs that now felt like evidence of a life that had been nothing more than an elaborate illusion. There was Jake at age 5, grinning gap-toothed while wearing a hard hat at one of my construction sites. There he was at 12, proudly holding up a fish we had caught together during a camping trip to Lake Tahoe. And there he was at 18, graduating from high school with academic honors, his arm around my shoulders as we posed for what I now realized might have been one of our last genuinely happy moments together. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by blueprints and awards, architectural journals and coffee mugs from various construction projects, trying to make sense of how thoroughly I had misunderstood my relationship with my only child. I had always assumed that despite our recent difficulties, despite Martha's interference and the painful aftermath of the divorce, Jake and I shared an unbreakable bond forged by years of shared experiences and mutual affection. Now I realized that I had been living in a fantasy world of my own creation. While I had been building my career and accumulating wealth and professional recognition, my son had been growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally unavailable. Martha's poisonous influence after the divorce had simply revealed truths that I had been too blind or too arrogant to acknowledge. I had failed as a father in ways that all my professional success could never compensate for. As I sat there in the darkness of my study, surrounded by the trappings of achievement that suddenly felt meaningless, I made a decision that would change the course of both our lives. If Jake wanted to remove me from his life with such finality, if he truly believed that I had never been a real father to him, then I would respect his wishes completely. But I would also reclaim my identity and my autonomy in ways that would force him to confront the full implications of his rejection. I had made too many compromises in my life, too many attempts to please people who ultimately chose to hurt me anyway. 25 years earlier, when I married Martha, I had even changed my name from Richardson to Peterson as a romantic gesture, wanting to show her that I was willing to sacrifice my identity for love. Now I realized that this gesture had been the first in a long series of self-betrayals that had led me to this moment of absolute clarity. The next morning, I called my longtime friend and attorney Theodore Blackwood and scheduled an emergency appointment for that afternoon. Theodore had handled my divorce proceedings with professional competence and personal compassion, and I trusted him to navigate the complex legal terrain I was about to enter. His office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city skyline I had helped shape with my architectural projects. Theodore listened without interruption as I explained what had transpired at lunch with Jake and outlined the drastic changes I wanted to make to my legal and financial arrangements. His silver eyebrows raised slightly when I described my intention to completely rewrite my will, but he took careful notes and asked thoughtful questions about my motivations and long-term goals. When I finished speaking, he leaned back in his leather chair and studied me with the analytical gaze that had made him one of the city's most successful attorneys. "Harvey," he said carefully, "these are significant changes that will have permanent consequences. Are you certain this is what you want to do? Sometimes family conflicts can be resolved with time and patience." I appreciated his concern, but my mind was made up with a clarity that surprised even me. I had spent months hoping for reconciliation, making excuses for Jake's behavior, and accepting treatment that no parent should have to endure. The time for patience had ended when my son looked me in the eye and declared that I had never been part of his life. Over the following weeks, Theodore and I worked methodically to restructure my entire estate. Jake's name was removed from every document, every account, every legal instrument that had previously designated him as my heir. The process was more complex than I had anticipated, requiring updates to insurance policies, retirement accounts, business ownership documents, and dozens of other financial arrangements I had never fully considered. I decided to divide my estate among several charitable organizations that had always held special meaning for me. The Children's Hospital Foundation would receive a substantial endowment to fund pediatric cancer research, honoring the memory of my younger brother, who had died of leukemia when we were both teenagers. The Veteran Support Network would benefit from my investment portfolio, recognizing the sacrifices made by men and women who had served their country with honor. Habitat for Humanity would inherit my real estate holdings, allowing them to provide housing for families who understood the value of having a stable home. Simultaneously, I began the process of legally reclaiming my original surname. Changing my name from Harvey Peterson back to Harvey Richardson required court appearances, paperwork, and bureaucratic procedures that felt like a symbolic rebirth. Each document I signed felt like another step away from the compromised version of myself I had become during my marriage, and toward the authentic identity I had abandoned years earlier. The transformation extended beyond legal documents to every aspect of my professional life. I contacted the graphic designer who had created my company's branding materials and commissioned new business cards, letterhead, and signage that restored Richardson and Associates to its rightful place. The bronze nameplate on my office door was replaced with one that bore my original name in elegant serif font. Even my email signature and professional website were updated to reflect my renewed identity. I felt a profound sense of liberation as I systematically erased every trace of the Peterson identity I had adopted to please a woman who ultimately betrayed me, and a son who had rejected me so completely. Each change felt like removing another chain that had bound me to a life that had never truly belonged to me. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based entirely on my own values and desires, rather than trying to satisfy people who would never appreciate my efforts. The most emotionally challenging part of this process was going through Jake's childhood belongings that I had carefully preserved in his old bedroom. Baseball trophies, school photographs, report cards, and hand-drawn pictures he had made for Father's Day were all boxed up and donated to charity. I kept nothing except a single photograph of us fishing together when he was 10 years old, which I placed in my office as a reminder of what we had once shared and what I was choosing to release. 6 months after that fateful lunch, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The legal changes were complete, the business rebranding was finished, and I had begun to discover who Harvey Richardson truly was, beneath all the layers of compromise and accommodation I had accumulated over the years. The most unexpected development was meeting Diana Whitmore at an art gallery opening that I attended on a whim one Friday evening in spring. Diana was standing before a large, abstract sculpture, her head tilted at an angle that suggested deep contemplation rather than casual observation. She wore a flowing dress in shades of blue and green that somehow complemented both her auburn hair and the artwork she was studying. When she turned to ask my opinion about the piece, I was struck by the intelligence and warmth in her hazel eyes. Our conversation began with art, but quickly expanded to encompass architecture, travel literature, and dozens of other topics that revealed our unexpected compatibility. She was a sculptor herself, working primarily with bronze and stone to create pieces that captured movement and emotion in ways that reminded me why I had originally fallen in love with design. Her studio occupied a converted warehouse space across town, filled with works in various stages of completion and tools that showed the evidence of serious artistic commitment. When she invited me to visit her workspace the following week, I felt a flutter of anticipation that I had not experienced in years. Diana knew nothing about my complicated family history or the painful rejection I had experienced from Jake. To her, I was simply Harvey Richardson, a successful architect who seemed confident and accomplished and emotionally available. She had no preconceived notions about who I should be or what I owed to people from my past. Our relationship developed naturally and without the baggage that had weighed down every interaction I had attempted with my son. We began spending weekends together, exploring farmers' markets and hiking trails, attending concerts, and visiting museums with the enthusiasm of people who had rediscovered their capacity for joy. Diana introduced me to contemporary artists whose work challenged my conventional aesthetic assumptions. I shared my knowledge of architectural history and urban planning principles that helped her understand how public spaces could enhance or diminish human interaction. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future, rather than trapped by obligations to people who did not value my presence in their lives. My business flourished as I approached projects with renewed creativity and energy. I began accepting speaking engagements at architectural conferences, sharing insights about sustainable design that reflected my growing environmental consciousness. I even started writing articles for professional journals, exploring ideas about how buildings could serve communities rather than simply generating profits. The transformation was so complete that colleagues and clients frequently commented on my improved mood and enhanced productivity. I had lost weight without trying. My sleep had improved dramatically, and I found myself laughing more often and more genuinely than I had in decades. Diana often remarked that I seemed like someone who had finally found his authentic self after years of playing a role that did not fit properly. My relationship with Diana deepened gradually and naturally, without the forced intensity that had characterized my marriage to Martha. We respected each other's independence while genuinely enjoying shared experiences. She never demanded that I change my name or compromise my professional identity or sacrifice my friendships to prove my devotion. Instead, she celebrated my successes and supported my ambitions while pursuing her own artistic goals with equal passion. By winter, we had moved in together, combining her creative chaos with my organized efficiency in ways that somehow created perfect harmony. Her sculptures found places throughout my house, transforming sterile spaces into environments that felt alive with artistic energy. My architectural books and planning documents shared shelf space with her art history volumes and exhibition catalogues. We were building a life together, based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than desperate need or societal expectations. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, exactly 6 months after our devastating lunch conversation, Jake appeared without warning at the offices of Richardson and Associates. I was reviewing blueprints for a new community center project when my secretary informed me that a young man claiming to be my son was requesting an immediate meeting. My first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity about what could have motivated this unexpected visit overrode my protective instincts. Jake looked different from how I remembered him. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something approaching uncertainty, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not been sleeping well. He stood in my office doorway, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the polished professional appearance he had maintained during our last encounter. Most notably, he seemed genuinely shocked by the changes he observed in my workspace. "The sign outside says Richardson and Associates," he said without preamble, his voice carrying a note of confusion that I found oddly satisfying. I thought maybe I had come to the wrong building, but the receptionist confirmed this is your company. When did you change the name back? His question revealed that he had been completely unaware of the systematic transformation I had undertaken in the months following his rejection. I gestured for him to take a seat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where clients and collaborators regularly sat to discuss projects worth millions of dollars. Jake perched on the edge of the seat, as if he might need to flee at any moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, and his gaze darting around the office to catalogue other changes he was only now beginning to notice. The nameplate on my desk, the diplomas on my wall, even my business cards scattered across the conference table all bore the Richardson name he had apparently forgotten was my original identity. "I changed it back because Peterson was never really my name," I replied calmly, my voice carrying none of the emotion or pleading that had characterized our previous conversations. "I adopted it when I married your mother as a romantic gesture, but after our conversation 6 months ago, I realized that gesture was a mistake. I have reclaimed my authentic identity in every aspect of my life." Jake's eyes widened as the full implications of this statement began to sink in. He started to speak several times, opening his mouth and then closing it again, as if words were failing him. Finally, he managed to ask the question that had obviously brought him to my office with such urgency and apparent distress. "I received a letter from some attorney I had never heard of," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something about changes to your will and estate planning. I thought maybe it was a mistake or some kind of scam. But when I tried to call you, your number had been changed to a business line that goes through a receptionist. What is going on? Dad." The irony of him calling me Dad after declaring that I had never been part of his life was not lost on me, but I chose not to comment on the inconsistency. Instead, I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a copy of my revised will, which Theodore had prepared specifically for this moment that we both knew would eventually arrive. I slid the document across the polished surface of my desk and watched Jake's face as he began to read. His complexion grew visibly paler as he scanned the pages that detailed how my entire estate had been redistributed to charitable organizations. The house where he had grown up, the company he had once assumed would be his inheritance, the investment accounts that represented decades of careful financial planning. All of it had been designated for purposes that had nothing to do with him or his future security. "This can't be legal," he said, his voice rising with panic and indignation. "You can't just cut me out of everything because we had one argument. I'm your only child, your only family. This has to be some kind of punishment that you plan to reverse once you feel like you have made your point." He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me painfully of the little boy who used to climb into my lap to hear bedtime stories. But I steeled myself against the emotional manipulation I recognized in his desperate expression. "You told me I was not part of your life." I responded with calm finality. "I respected your decision and acted accordingly. You are indeed my biological child, but family relationships require mutual participation and basic respect. Since you made it clear that you consider me irrelevant to your existence, I have removed you from mine as completely as you removed me from yours." The conversation that followed was unlike anything that had ever passed between us, marked by a raw honesty that cut through years of avoidance and pretense. Jake attempted every persuasive technique in his arsenal, beginning with angry demands and progressing through tearful apologies to desperate bargaining. He claimed that his words at the restaurant had been spoken in anger, that he had been influenced by his mother's bitterness, that he had never intended for me to take his rejection so literally or so permanently. I listened to his explanations with the same professional detachment I brought to client meetings, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no emotional responses to his increasingly frantic appeals. When he finished speaking, I calmly outlined the timeline of opportunities he had been given to repair our relationship, and his consistent choice to reject or ignore every olive branch I had extended. For nearly 2 years after the divorce, I attempted to maintain contact with you. I explained consulting notes I had prepared for this inevitable confrontation. I called every Sunday for 6 months, leaving voicemails that were never returned. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that were never acknowledged. I invited you to dinner dozens of times, receiving either no response or last-minute cancellations. I attended your graduation from college despite your expressed preference that I stay away. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair as I methodically recounted his pattern of rejection and dismissal. His face flushed with what might have been shame or embarrassment as I described specific incidents where he had chosen cruelty over basic civility. The weight of his own behavior, presented as an objective timeline rather than an emotional accusation, seemed to affect him more powerfully than any angry confrontation might have achieved. When you finally agreed to have lunch with me, I continued, I genuinely believed you were ready to begin healing our relationship. Instead, you used that opportunity to deliver what amounted to a formal declaration of independence from any family connection to me. You did not say you were angry or hurt or disappointed. You said I had never been part of your life. Those were your exact words, spoken with conviction and finality. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window that overlooked the city skyline, giving him a moment to absorb the implications of what I was saying. When I turned back to face him, I saw that he was staring at his hands. His shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat that told me he was beginning to understand that his visit would not achieve the reversal he had hoped for. I spent that night thinking about your words and realized you were probably right, I said gently but firmly. I had been so focused on providing financial security and professional success that I missed the daily moments that actually create father-son bonds. I was not present for your emotional needs, your personal struggles, your important milestones in ways that truly mattered. My love for you was genuine, but my expression of that love was inadequate. Jake looked up sharply, hope flickering in his eyes as he misinterpreted my acknowledgement of past mistakes as an opening for reconciliation. But I had not finished explaining the conclusions I had reached during those long months of reflection and rebuilding. However, I continued, I also realized that accepting responsibility for my failures does not obligate me to accept ongoing disrespect or emotional abuse. You are 28 years old, fully capable of making your own decisions about relationships and family connections. You made your choice very clearly. I have simply honored that choice and moved forward with my life accordingly. The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate his consciousness in a way that left him speechless for several long moments. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small and uncertain, lacking the confidence that had characterized his previous declarations. So there is nothing I can do to change your mind. No way to fix this and go back to how things used to be. The question revealed that he still did not fully understand the irreversible nature of certain choices and their consequences. I felt a moment of sadness for the innocence he was losing even at his advanced age about how actions and words could permanently alter relationships. There is no going back, I replied with gentle finality. But there could potentially be a way forward if you were genuinely committed to building something entirely new, based on mutual respect rather than entitlement. That would require acknowledging the harm you have caused, demonstrating consistent change in your behavior over time, and accepting that our relationship would be fundamentally different from what it was before. Jake's face lit up with desperate hope as he began to outline promises and commitments he was prepared to make immediately. But I raised my hand to stop him before he could launch into what I recognized as another attempt at manipulation through false urgency. Any such process would take years, not minutes, I told him firmly, and it would require proof of genuine change rather than words spoken in panic when you discovered financial consequences for your choices. Right now you are here because you learned about my will, not because you missed having a father. That tells me everything I need to know about your current motivations. 2 years have passed since that conversation in my office, and I can honestly say that my life has exceeded every expectation I dared to hold for happiness and fulfillment. Diana and I were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and colleagues who celebrated our union with genuine joy and enthusiasm. Our wedding day was perfect in its simplicity and authenticity, free from the drama and manipulation that had characterized so much of my previous family experience. We honeymooned in Italy, spending 3 weeks exploring architectural marvels and art museums that inspired both of our creative passions. Diana sketched constantly during our travels, filling notebook after notebook with observations that would later inform her sculptural work. I photographed buildings and public spaces that demonstrated innovative approaches to urban planning and sustainable design. We returned home with hundreds of images and ideas that continue to influence our respective artistic pursuits. My business has flourished beyond anything I achieved during the years when I was distracted by family conflicts and emotional turmoil. Richardson and Associates now employs 47 people and has been recognized with several prestigious awards for our contributions to environmentally conscious architecture. We recently completed an affordable housing project that will provide homes for 200 families while incorporating solar energy systems and rainwater collection features that reduce environmental impact. I have also become more involved in charitable activities, serving on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation and participating in fundraising events that have raised millions of dollars for pediatric cancer research. The Veterans Support Network has used my financial contributions to establish job training programs that help former military personnel transition to civilian careers in construction and engineering fields. Habitat for Humanity has built 17 new homes using funds from my estate planning, providing stable housing for families who understand the value of shelter and community. Diana and I have created a life together that reflects our shared values and individual strengths. She has had 3 successful gallery exhibitions in the past 2 years, with her bronze sculptures attracting attention from collectors and critics throughout the region. I have been invited to lecture at universities and professional conferences about the intersection of architectural design and social responsibility. We support each other's ambitions while maintaining our individual identities and creative independence. The house that once felt like a monument to failed relationships has been transformed into a space that celebrates art, beauty, and genuine partnership. Diana's sculptures create focal points that draw the eye and spark conversation. My architectural books and planning documents coexist harmoniously with her art history collections and exhibition catalogues. We have hosted dinner parties and charity events that bring together people from diverse backgrounds who share our commitment to making positive contributions to society. I rarely think about Jake anymore, except when well-meaning friends ask about him, or when I encounter fathers and sons enjoying healthy relationships that remind me of possibilities that might have existed under different circumstances. I feel no anger or resentment toward him, only a calm acceptance that some relationships cannot be salvaged regardless of how much effort or goodwill is invested in the attempt. The most important lesson I have learned through this experience is that genuine love sometimes requires letting go of people who are determined to cause harm or create chaos. For too many years, I enabled destructive behavior by making excuses, offering second chances, and accepting treatment that no person should have to endure. When I finally established boundaries and maintained them consistently, I discovered a peace and happiness that had been missing from my life for decades. I have also learned that it is never too late to reclaim your authentic identity and pursue relationships that honor your worth and dignity. Meeting Diana proved that love can be gentle and supportive rather than demanding and destructive. Building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values has shown me what healthy relationships actually look like when both people are committed to bringing out the best in each other. The charitable organizations that will inherit my estate have already benefited from my involvement and financial support, using resources to help people who face genuine challenges through no fault of their own. Children battling cancer receive better treatment options because of medical research funded through the Hospital Foundation. Veterans struggling with unemployment find new career paths through job training programs. Families lacking adequate housing gain stability and security through construction projects that create communities. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. When someone tells you that you are not part of their life, believe them, and then create a life so beautiful that their absence becomes your freedom rather than your loss. I wonder if you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments below, and please share your own experiences with difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience and transformation. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message about the power of choosing yourself when others choose to push you away. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to create the authentic life you deserve.